Straight to our top story, the crisis in Ukraine. The unrest in the east shows no sign of abating. The world's top diplomats have been meeting in Geneva this Thursday, searching for a peaceful way out of the crisis. Russian Foreign Secretary Sergei Lavrov issued an immediate appeal for broad dialogue in the country following a deadly night in the southeastern city of Mariupol. A gang of 300 pro-Russian armed men staged an unsuccessful attack on a military base there. 3 of the attackers were killed and more than a dozen wounded. Ukraine has since tightened border controls, issuing restrictions on the entry into the country of Russian males between the ages of 16 and 60. Officials say the restrictions are due to the ongoing anti-terror operation announced this week by the government. Well, our correspondents are covering this story from every angle. Reza Sayegh is at those talks in Geneva and Frederick Pleitgen is in the Ukrainian capital, Kiev. So, Reza, let's start with you. We are hearing that leaders at Geneva reached an agreement to de-escalate the crisis. How strong is that statement, and is it going to be able to be applied on the ground?
Well, a lot of questions remain, Fionnuala. We can tell you about the deal, but it's certainly unclear how effective this deal is going to be because it seems to lack some critical specifics that leaves its effectiveness in question. In a joint statement after the summit, the 4 top diplomats announced that all sides should refrain from violence. They called on armed groups to lay down their arms, and they called on occupied buildings to be freed. However, nowhere is it stated that who is to blame for the violence, who's carrying the arms, and who's occupying the buildings. Again, critical specifics missing. Also missing is a way for these principles, for these agreements to be enforced and carried out on the ground, leaving authorities in Kiev and Moscow to implement this. I mean, remember, these are 2 disputing factions who don't trust one another and have long blamed one another for escalating the crisis in Ukraine. And perhaps one of the strongest indicators that big differences remain is a statement by U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry. He acknowledged that Russia has yet to commit to removing some of its troops from along the Russia-Ukrainian border. He also acknowledged that Washington has not ruled out imposing further sanctions. And then you have Sergei Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, who made it clear that Russia still has demands. One of its demands remains a federalized Ukraine. They want constitutional reform, they want an election process, and they want the ethnic Russian-dominated provinces in eastern Ukraine to have autonomy. And perhaps in one of his most intriguing statements, U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry said authorities in Kiev were ready to accommodate that demand, Fionnuala. But again, that comment lacked details. But overall, all diplomats tried to strike a positive tone. They tried to be conciliatory, but big differences seem to remain, and the diplomats also agreed to have further talks. It's not clear when that's going to happen, Fionnuala.
Well, Reza, thank you there in Geneva, but let's go to Frederick Pleitgen on the ground in Kiev, and this really is the issue here. I think Secretary Kerry said something about words are only words on paper until they're put into action. So do you think this deal to de-escalate and have the OSCE come in will actually work there on the ground when it comes to mediating this crisis?
Well, I think you're absolutely right, Fionnuala. In the end, the proof is going to be in the pudding. At this point, this is really nothing more than a declaration, really, if you will. And I was able to speak earlier today to the acting prime minister of this country, Arseniy Yatsenyuk, and he also said that he did feel that this was quite a positive outcome from these talks that had happened. He said that initially, when all this started, he didn't believe that anything would come out of it, that the sides would meet, but they wouldn't even come to a common declaration. So he said, at least this is something like a first step. However, he did say that until things change on the ground, that in effect nothing has happened. He wants to see more happen. Let's listen into some of what Mr. Yatsenyuk had to say to me earlier today.
It's not even a step, sir. The first declaration to make the step. Whether I have any trust to Russians? No. But as they go public, we urge them to undertake real steps, to pull back their security forces, to pull back their FSB agents, to stop to finance these terrorist organizations that are deployed in southern and eastern Ukraine, and to do everything they can to de-escalate the situation.
So as you can hear there, Fionnuala, some very strong words for the people who have taken over those buildings, but at the same time, he also did strike a more conciliatory tone as well. And I want to get back to something that Reza was saying before about how the Russians were saying that there needed to be reforms, there needed to be more federalism in the east of the country, and that John Kerry said that, yes, the interim government here in Kiev is ready to do that. Mr. Yatsenyuk said exactly the same thing to me. He said that they're willing to grant the eastern part of the country more autonomy, and that the government here, in fact, needed to do more to meet the needs of the people who are in the east of the country, to show them that they are part of a new Ukraine and belong into this country. So certainly he also did have a lot of conciliatory things to say, but there were terms where he remained very, very strong. He kept calling the people who were occupying those buildings, he kept calling them terrorists, and he has said that this operation will continue to go on. Nevertheless, it seemed as though at least there's an inkling of hope that this could be at least the first step to try and de-escalate the situation that seemed to have been ramping up in the past couple of days, Fionnuala.
Yep, it is still early days, though, since that Geneva conference. We shall see. Frederick Pleitgen, Reza Sayar, thank you both very much for joining us. The View there from Fred on the